The S5 truss structure arrived at the Kennedy Space Center from Tulsa, Oklahoma, aboard NASA's Super Guppy aircraft on March 12th of 2002, over 5 years ago. It was shipped to KSC along with its twin, the P5 truss, which was launched recently on the STS-118 mission. Upon arrival, both trusses were delivered to the KSC Space Station Processing Facility, where both elements underwent preparations for flight, including final assembly, checkout, and test of all of the components on each truss. Our STS-118 flight crew came down a number of times during the flow to take a first-hand look at the hardware and to practice with some of the tools and procedures that they'll use on orbit to attach S5 to the S4 truss, which is currently on orbit. Once our work was completed in April, we had a bit of dwell, and then on June 25th of this year, the element was hoisted for the last time in the SSPF, weighed, and then installed into our payload transportation canister for delivery to the pad. S5 weighs 4,010 pounds and serves as a mechanical spacer between the S3 and S4 truss segment, which is on orbit today, launched on the STS-119 mission, and will also serve as the bridge to the S6 truss, which will be the last of the truss elements launched to the station at the very tail end of the assembly sequence. The third external stowage platform was prepared at the SpaceHab Payload Processing Facility in Cape Canaveral, Florida by Vic Blum and the Astrium team there. And this is a view of our flight crew again working with that hardware before it was delivered to KSC. You can see 3 of the large orbital replacement units that sit atop this stowage platform. There's another on the bottom side of the platform for a total of 4 large spare parts that we're delivering to the station for future use. On the 20th of June of this year, the carrier was delivered to the Space Station Processing Facility, where it was lifted up and hoisted into the transportation canister again for delivery to the pad. ESP-3 with the ORUs attached weighs about 7,000 pounds in this configuration. The carrier also has a number of provisions on it for additional spare parts, which will be brought up on future missions. The SpaceHab module was prepared also at the SpaceHab Payload Processing Facility in Cape Canaveral by Kim Anderson, Don Moore, and the rest of the SpaceHab team. This is the last flight of this venerable cargo carrier that flew with us last on the STS-116 mission. For this flight, the module, as loaded, weighs about 11,400 pounds and is carrying up and down about 5,000 pounds of much-needed cargo to and from the station. The module was delivered to KSC on the 27th of June and, like S5 and ESP-3, installed into the payload transportation canister. On that same day, the transportation canister left the Space Station Processing Facility and made the short drive down the road to the canister rotation facility. At that facility, the canister was rotated from horizontal to vertical and mated atop the transporter. This is typical of the process that we use for each flight to carry ISS elements from the processing facility out to the launch pad. On the 8th of July of this year, the canister made the long journey from the canister rotation facility out to Pad A. That took about 3 hours to complete. We typically deliver in the middle of the night because that's when weather is most favorable here in Florida to avoid thunderstorms and rain and high winds. Once at the pad, the canister is carefully positioned under the rotating service structure and hoisted into position up into that structure. Within the rotating service structure, there is a room called the payload changeout room that contains a gantry called the payload ground handling mechanism, which moves forward and picks the payload elements up out of the transportation canister and pulls them into the back of the payload changeout room. Once that's complete, the canister doors are closed and it lowers and is taken away. Once we install all the elements into the orbiter and made all the appropriate electrical and fluid connections and test those connections, we perform our final inspections and closeouts and cleaning, and ultimately that leads to what you see here now, and that is the final payload bay door closure, which took place on the 28th of July of this year.